The State Department carried out widespread layoffs last summer, but it's still scrutinizing its workforce. The department is planning to potentially remove or reassign more Foreign Service employees who don't meet new performance standards. This comes as the Trump administration is planning to limit the number of federal employees who can receive top marks on their annual performance reviews. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman is here with more details. Jory, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Terry. Great to be here.
Before we dig on what's new, catch us up. What kind of workforce cuts did the State Department go through last year?
Right. So last summer, the State Department sent reduction in force notices to about 1,300 of its employees. Those were predominantly people who work in the civil service side of the department, people who are typically stateside. Also, it impacted about 250 Foreign Service officers. These are people who normally serve abroad, but by virtue of where they were in terms of their posts, they were stateside when these RIF notices went out. And in a lot of cases, they were going to be heading back out overseas, but then got these layoff notices. So for the vast majority of these layoffs, they've actually been finalized. These employees have been largely separated from the agency. But those 250 Foreign Service officers that I mentioned, they are still on paid administrative leave. They've been in this strange limbo circumstance where they were caught up in some of the lawsuits regarding layoffs and when they could happen around last year's 43-day government shutdown. And so the State Department has yet to officially separate these people, but they at this point have no intention of bringing them back or letting them compete for other jobs because the Foreign Service actually is in hiring mode. In recent months, they've been bringing a couple hundred Foreign Service officers on board, and that's actually frustrated some of the Democratic lawmakers hearing this. They say that why bring on new recruits when you can bring in people who already have the skills, who already have the security clearances, everything that they've learned on the job.
And does the Department of State have a good answer for that?
Well, the Undersecretary for Management, Jason Evans, he recently testified before members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He says that the Foreign Service needs new blood. They need people brought in with a new perspective, and that the Foreign Service is largely a career-long service that they get you relatively early in your career, and you spend 30, 40 years doing this work. And so that's their perspective. They say that under the Biden administration, they actually didn't do enough hiring in the Foreign Service. And as a result, there's kind of a donut hole situation where they have a lot of early career people, a lot of late career people about to retire, but there's this missing middle that they need to fill. And that's something that they can't do overnight.
So what else, with all of that turbulence, is the Foreign Service doing to vet its workforce?
So something they are bringing back is this concept of low-ranking Foreign Service employees. This is something that has been a tool that the Foreign Service has relied on in the past. What this really means is the Foreign Service is largely a up or out system where you make your way up the ranks, you get promotions, and if you don't, then you are recommended for removal. And so what this is going to look like is that they are going to take a closer look at how these employees are performing. And if they are not meeting the mark, then Evans told the committee that they will be recommended for removal. Here's what he had to say about that.
And the first step in that process is to work with that person to see if we can develop the skill sets that they're lacking to bring them up to speed. And if we get to a situation where that person is just not right for the Foreign Service, then we'll make a different decision. But we are really looking very closely about not only the top end of the evaluation process, but the bottom end.
Jory, how does what's happening at the State Department compare to what's happening across the federal government?
Yeah, so this is all happening as the Office of Personnel Management has introduced a proposed rule that would limit how many federal employees at agencies can receive the highest rankings, the highest marks on their annual performance reviews. And those reviews tie to a lot of things. They tie to performance bonuses for some people. They tie to who gets to stay around in the federal service. If they are, consistently getting low marks, then that could be grounds for their removal. Under this new proposed system, OPM is saying that there would be a forced distribution system where only a set number of employees could get a 5, only a certain number of employees could get a 4, a 3, and so on and so forth. And so by that system, it stands to reason that there would be employees who would have to get lower marks, people who get 3s or 2s or things like that. And so Evans says that the State Department is going to comply with that new system. They are aware of these changes happening government-wide. And one thing he told lawmakers is that the State Department is also going to be scrutinizing supervisors giving out those grades and making sure that they are not giving everyone 5s.
We're going to hold supervisors accountable. If supervisors decide that every one of their direct reports is a superstar and gives everybody a 5, then that's going to look poorly upon that supervisor. We actually expect them to rank people that come in every day and do an outstanding job. That's what we expect. That's the norm. People that do exceptional work, those are a little bit higher, and then the true superstars are going to be a little bit higher than that, which will allow us to truly identify the people that are doing the best work within the department and give them the leadership opportunities and the promotion opportunities and the assignment opportunities to put them in the places where we can best utilize their skill sets.
Have the unions who represent the State Department workforce had anything to say about these proposed changes?
We did hear from the American Foreign Service Association about everything that went down at this hearing. The president of AFSA, John Dinkelman, says that low ranking is a tool that the State Department has had at its disposal in the past, and so this is not something they are dealing with that is new, but he did raise concerns about supervisors essentially ranking employees, being able to compare the performance of one employee against another in a workforce that is globally distributed. This is a workforce that has over 200 posts overseas. These are people who have radically different skill sets. There's obviously different cones of what the Foreign Service actually does. And so he says that the ability for a supervisor to grade an employee relative to others prevents what he calls an insurmountable challenge.
How were the proposals received by the committee members on the Hill?
So there were definitely some concerns from Democratic lawmakers, again, over filling the Foreign Service ranks with new recruits, but at the same time that they are sidelining these people who are more seasoned, who have all of the credentials and the experience and the language skills that you would need to succeed in the Foreign Service. Republican lawmakers were looking at some other things. They are looking at changing and updating the legislation that underpins the Foreign Service. It's largely looking the same that it has since 1980 under the Foreign Service Act. One of the members of the committee, Congressman Mike Lawler, a Republican from New York, says that the legislation should be updated to reflect the current realities of the Foreign Service. Lawmakers, I think, more broadly, did recognize this as the Foreign Service working at a time where there's a lot of substantial changes happening in the international arena, that the U.S., of course, is engaged in military conflict with Iran, that we've removed Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela, and that there's a naval blockade of Cuba. So there's various conflict zones happening across the globe, and we do need a muscular diplomatic workforce to manage all of these things happening across the globe simultaneously.
And so then, Jory, what happens next? Are these reforms moving forward?
These are largely reforms that the State Department seems to be carrying out on its own. This is something that they don't seem to be waiting around for Congress to sign off on. At the same time, lawmakers do want to, revisit and perhaps vote on some of the legislation that underpins the Foreign Service, them putting their mark and their blessing on some of this in ways that they see fit.
That's Federal News Network's Jory Heckman. Jory, thanks for keeping us up to date.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com.